up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Castle Podcast. I am your host, Rachel Krieger. Once again, we are joined by a special guest last week, or 2 weeks ago. Oh my gosh, I'm losing track of time. We had Kate McKay and Leah Pace from Pitt Women's Soccer on the show, so it was great having them. A big thank you to them. To kind of tease the next one, we're going to have another member of the women's soccer team for Pitt soon. I'll give you a hint. It is a goalkeeper. So there's your choices. But this week we have a fellow journalist, a friend of mine, one of the most well-respected people, I believe, in Pittsburgh media here, Mike.
Okay.
How are you Mike? I totally just forgot how to say your last name, so I'm going to make you say it for everybody. And why don't you introduce yourself?
No problem. I'm used to it. Mike Asti, I'll say. I get Asti, I get Asti. It's like the champagne. It's a place in Italy, so it works either way. And I run Pittsburgh Sports Live right now. So I'm the program director of PSL. Manage Steelers now, so that's where my main beat Steelers coverage comes from. One of the two men, along with Alan Saunders, credentialed for the Steelers there, and then also contribute to WV Sports now, Metro News, which is an outlet in West Virginia, for anybody who doesn't know, and then also sometimes 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh. And previously, I ran what was Trib Live Radio that doesn't really exist as an entity anymore, but I ran that for years and was with the Trib, and then also reported WPXI and did play-by-play for tons of high school sports in the area, championship level all the way through, as well as college from back. I went to WVU, so I have the weird thing to say that I covered an NCAA tournament, a women's NCAA tournament actually, in college and professionally, because I was a broadcaster for Robert Morris as well. So I will admit it was more fun doing it in college when my best friend and I got to drive from Morgantown, West Virginia to Austin, Texas, and had that entire experience that was basically like a Seinfeld episode. It was kind of a sitcom that included Hale in Dallas, Texas, but I also did it professionally on ESPN, so that was kind of cool when I got paid. But the college experience was more fun. But yeah, I've done a lot of media for sure, and I'm happy to join it. Yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a while. My schedule's been all kinds of screwed up, as I said, that I went from being frozen on Steelers Zooms and probably being made fun of on Canadian Sports Center to not knowing when games are played and getting my schedule all screwed up. And I will tell you, though, Rachel, at least that I'm no longer, no matter what goes on, even in 2020, I am no longer having to track Antonio Brown's Instagram at 3 a.m, because as you could imagine years ago, that was the case, that I was literally having to have the notifications on and ready for AB to go live on IG at any time, which always seemed to be around 3 to 4 a.m. And then what he said has been well documented. But yeah, that at least is no longer happening for me. So that's at least a win.
Well, you gave me a laugh this morning because I saw your quote tweet about the article about some Steelers player got called out on TikTok or whatever. Yeah. And I just saw your quote tweet that was I refuse to cover this. And I was like, good for you, Mike.
Yeah, I actually have some ideas on who that actually might be. So it makes it even a reason that I'm not going to cover it even more because he's not a consequential player, I'll say right now. But yeah, I will admit, though, that even though I didn't cover it, I will admit that I did. They pulled me in. I did click the article, and I had to dig a little bit because, to be fair, it wouldn't have been professional of me if I didn't try to research a little bit. But I then I did that, and I decided that this was no longer worth my time. But they did pull me in. But yes, that is that is the world we're living in. It is so rarely about the Steelers, and sometimes I'm appearing on shows and people ask me what somebody is thinking. That whole drama, I felt like I was a psychologist as well as a journalist. So I'm happy we're going to talk football, at least I'm assuming.
Yes, for the most part, pretty much. I will take some of the blame on the scheduling too, as the listeners pretty much know from my rants and probably the parts they skip over. Soccer dominates my life, and just because they're in close proximity, I'm going to start off the show by saying congrats to the Columbus Crew on their victory in the MLS Cup. So big win, good job, Columbus. You got to keep your team, and now you beat my precious Sounders. So whatever.
Columbus is a cool city. I will tell you, Columbus is an underrated city. Even the sports scene, even not only with the Crew, but obviously Ohio State, but even around the Blue Jackets. The area around there is like a college atmosphere. I liked going to Blue Jackets games even back in the day before they got good and before Torts. So it's an underrated sports town, I will say. So getting some championship there is good. And maybe they'll get another one in college football that may or may not be legit, may or may not be legitimate. But still, it's cool for that area. It's kind of the forgotten area in Ohio with Cincinnati and Cleveland, but it's a cool little sports town.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so congrats, Crew. There's my, I guess, obligatory. I'll say it. So yeah, let's talk Steelers. So everyone is kind of hitting the panic button in a lot of ways because the Steelers have dropped their last two, albeit against, pretty tough opponents. This last drop was against the Buffalo Bills. So Mike, from your point of view, first question is, what were your thoughts of the Bills game? And second question is, are you hitting the panic button?
Well, I am not hitting. I'll answer the second one first. I am not hitting the panic button necessarily because, as Ben Roethlisberger told us in our Zoom session today, the day we're recording this, they do have the advantage of already clinching a playoff spot. That was forgotten the day they lost to the Bills, that hours earlier they clinched a postseason appearance because Miami's loss to the Chiefs. Miami actually played really well in that game despite losing to the defending champs. But that put the Steelers in. And as I alluded to here in my open, with all the drama and all the injuries of those 2 years, and that's rare for Mike Tomlin, I don't think he gets enough credit that he hasn't had a losing season as Steelers head coach. Those 2 years were the first 2 years in a row consecutively that he missed the postseason. And if they would have had this current playoff format that I'm sure we'll get to, as weird as it is, they would have actually got in. As crazy as that is to say that a guy named Duck and a GQ model would have led that team to the postseason if they had this current playoff format, that's the case. So I'm not panicking because they're going to be in and they do have an advantage. I think another reason why I'm not panicking, we're recording this now after the Browns suffered a loss to the Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football. Had the Browns won that game, it might have been a different story. It does provide some cushion for the Steelers, but there's also plenty of reason to have concern. It is a long season. I never thought they were going to go undefeated. That just never was something I thought. So you figured losses were going to happen. Another reason not to panic. But it's more, Rachel, how this team is played, because this team is 11-2 as we stand. This team easily could have 4 or 5 losses. Easily. If you look back at this season, look back at this schedule. They played the Broncos earlier in the year, a Broncos team that later on would prove how horribly they were handling COVID with having no quarterback in a game because quarterbacks got together to kind of practice and felt like they were gung-ho and they didn't wear masks, and then contact tracing ruined the entire quarterback room. But they went to their third-string quarterback against the Steelers, was the worst situation they had really prior to that game without a quarterback, and they almost won. The Steelers gave Carson Wentz his best game of the season. Wentz has now been benched. There's already conversation and rumors about him being done in Philly for good, with Hurts getting in there. Maybe he'll be the future Steelers quarterback, depending on how things finish out with Ben. That's already been kind of brought up. That's more of an offseason conversation. But he played well against Pittsburgh, and they almost came back and beat the Steelers. The Steelers played horrible against Dallas, who was very beaten up at the time, with Dak already gone down with an injury and Ezekiel Elliott having his worst game of the year. They played poorly against the Ravens after the mess of all those rescheduled games after Thanksgiving and RG3 being the starting quarterback. They only won that game 19-14. I mean, it looked like a old Big East college football score, Pitt, West Virginia. Like, it wasn't a game that you leave feeling good about the Steelers in that victory by any means. And then I'm not just bragging here. I will say, brush my shoulders off, I actually picked them to lose to the Washington football team, and they did. And that was a solid Washington defense. It felt like a team that maybe could, bite them prior to a big game because that Bills game was so big. They didn't play well in that game at all, and they lost. You could then say, okay, that's an aberration. But then they play so poorly against the Bills. They didn't just lose. They legitimately played poorly against Buffalo, hung in there in the first half, but the Bills were able to pull away. And really the other concern is not only have the Steelers played poorly and they could have lost more, So it's almost like the chickens are finally coming to roost a little bit for Pittsburgh, and then humble pie is being served, which maybe could be a blessing. But their offense has just gone into the witness protection program. The offense earlier in the year was one of the best in the league, tons of talent. Chase Claypool was everyone's favorite receiver. He was being compared to Randy Moss in terms of rookie seasons in NFL history. And I'm not just saying that. That was a comparison that was thrown out there. That's how great he was the first 6-7 weeks of the year. And then they went into a situation really that started since the Jacksonville game. They did have that domination of the Bengals, who we'll get to in a moment, because they're going to able maybe to rejuvenate themselves against Cincy again. But since then, the receivers, not only are they not able to dominate like they were earlier in the year, they flat out can't catch the football. I mean, it really is that, and it's odd to say. It's the fundamentals now for the Steelers. They have been so deep at receiver with Juju, Claypool, Deontay Johnson, who was so great last year, kind of underrated, injured the beginning portion of this season. Many thought he'd be the new future number one if Juju's not back here next year. And he can't catch the football. He was the guy that got benched against the Bills because he dropped the first 2 passes of the game. I honestly thought it was a joke. I thought I was being trolled or I was hallucinating. The first 2 passes, he drops them right through his fingers after the whole conversation all week about Steelers receivers can't catch the football. And the only beneficiary of this is James Washington gets some playing time. He was not used at all the prior several weeks. He's getting some deep ball looks and getting utilized even more than that now, like he kind of was last year. So good for him. It shows how deep they are, but they have no receivers that can catch the football as we stand. Maybe that'll get turned around. And they have no running game. And that even includes James Conner coming back. They still can't run the football. It doesn't matter who's in there. I've never thought any of these guys, including Conner, were a featured back, but all of them together should be better than this. And it's been so bad, whether that's the offensive line being hurt or what, but it's been so bad running the football, they legitimately gave up on it in the second half against Buffalo, which, as you know, even if you're trailing, you have to have some semblance of a threat to run. You don't need to be the Titans with Derrick Henry and burn 200 yards every game. You need some threat, though, because especially with an older quarterback, and Ben has started to play worse now, of course, and that's a conversation, that you take away play action pass, you make yourselves one-dimensional, you make it easier on the defense. There's not even a threat of running the football right now for the Steelers. So, yeah, they're 11-2. Yeah, that's good. Yes, Ben is right. You're just preparing now for the playoffs. You can get back into things. It's not the end of the world. You probably weren't going to go undefeated. But the way they've lost, how bad they played, how long they played poorly, and the fact that there's just so many issues. And I think, too, they've dealt with so much drama, not only over the years, but this year with COVID-19, where they haven't had a legitimate bye week. They lost their bye earlier in the season. They did have a 5-day period without practice during the issue with the Ravens game, but they didn't even know when the game was going to happen. So mentally, that might not have been a break. And they've been messed with COVID-wise more than any team. And yes, Tomlin got fined earlier in the year for the mask thing, but so have many other coaches, and they didn't have the issue that the Steelers have had schedule-wise. I get it's hard for the NFL, but the Steelers, fair or not, have been kind of screwed schedule-wise, and they've dealt with so many injuries. They entered the year very, very deep, which is a benefit, and that's being tested now. But they have dealt with so many injuries. Going to Devin Bush goes down. He's a rookie. He was a rookie sensation last year. Feels like the future of this defense now. Him and TJ, just a genius really out there on the field, and he's done. And then Spillane, who most casual fans probably hadn't even heard of, fits right in, plays well, and now he's out with an injury. Mm-hmm. So they've been really battle tested injury wise. Every facet of the game has seemingly declined, and it's a little bit of chickens coming to roost from earlier poor play that now is actually an issue and leading to losses. And now they are on the verge right now. They are the number 2 seed in the AFC. So they are on the verge of not having that first round bye that they so coveted. If you lose the number 1 seed, you don't have the bye based on the new format. And they don't even have the division locked up right now with the Browns playing so well. They will play the Browns to end the season. So the Browns get that win, depending on how things go for Pittsburgh. They could still somehow snag the division. Probably unlikely, but this is no longer a situation where the Steelers can rest anybody or be just preparing for the postseason. They now need to get back ready to get better and improve themselves here in the regular season before that even happens.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things, and to give you some backup there, you were not the only one who picked the Steelers to lose against, as I like to call them, Washington Football Club, because it just sounds classier.
They should just permanently do that. They should change
Washington
team to club
FC.
And just permanently. Yeah, that I would totally be down for.
DC United's not using the name, neither is the Washington Spirit, so it's open. So Washington, come on.
I even think actually with the Indians in baseball, with their recent announcement that they're going to change that name, they did the weird thing where they're going to keep their name that they admitted is offensive for one more year and just sell some merch. So they're just going to offend for another year and then be done offending. So what they could have done is they could have been Cleveland FC. Or honestly, it's weird to say this. I think a franchise should have taken their cues from Dan Snyder and copied him, and it would have been better. Because this is it's odd to say.
But you never thought you'd say.
No, but that's a better plan than to just say, we agree it's offensive, but we're just going to keep on offending as you buy things for another year. Like, that's odd. So Cleveland FC would have been cool too. But yeah, I'm actually down with Washington Football Club.
Yeah, you were not the only one to pick Washington Football Club losing. Most of our staff actually picked Washington Football Club to win, pardon me. Okay. We were all just kind of like, listen, there's that one game every year that the Steelers have, and it's one of those that everyone says they're going to win, everyone thinks they're going to win, and then they lose. But the game against the Bills, I was able to catch it for once this season, and it was rough. It was a rough game. I was watching it, and I was just like, man, I haven't actually sit down to watch a Steeler game since maybe like week 4, week 5. And, what you said pretty much hit it on the spot. Back then, which feels like forever ago, the Steelers receivers were amazing. They were on fire. Everyone was screaming about Chase Claypool being off the ESPN rookie top 10 list or whatever they had. And now like nobody can catch the ball. And it's like, yikes. What's going on here? But I think the thing that you said there that really stuck out to me and that I am a stark defender on is Mike Tomlin. And I hate the hate that he gets for, he's had a winning season every year. He's leading a team during COVID-19, a very successful team that right now they might not look the part, but, the record shows it. The guy's a good coach. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, I think there's absolutely no way he's not going to get in. And it's just comparing to who's already in the Hall of Fame. So it's not my even opinion. It is the standard that has been set by the voters of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So I'm just following their format and just following kind of what they've clearly expressed to this point. Tony Dungy, Hall of Famer. He has won championship. He failed a few times before. Less win total, didn't do it as long because he ended up retiring early. Bill Cowher, Hall of Famer, tons of postseason failures off deep runs in the 90s, did win the championship late at the end of his career, had the Super Bowl loss in Super Bowl 30 at the end of the 95 season, appeared in 6 AFC title games. I think Steeler fans, if they would think to themselves, imagine if Bill Cowher, you had that exact same era doing social media. Imagine that. The Steelers went in favored a lot of those playoff games. They would lose. You're losing to teams like the Colts. You're losing to a Charger team that got blown their doors off in a Super Bowl appearance against the 49ers that year. I mean, you're losing to Jim Harbaugh, oddly enough, was a quarterback to a team to a team that you played in one of those title games. You actually beat him. But the point of it is he was in plenty of big games, lost them. He didn't win in towards the end of his career with a team that kind of guided him. It's a similar resume, really. I mean, it's not to say Bill Cowher wasn't a great coach. He had a lot of winning. He did it a little different way. Did not have a Hall of Fame quarterback most of the time, so that's certainly an advantage that he did not have. But still, a very similar resume in terms of win total, in terms of accomplishment. He got in. Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, too. Andy Reid. A lot of these coaches of this era are going to get in based on the standard that's been set by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So to go through a career of 100-plus wins, of all these division titles, playoff appearances, he went 8-8 once, but never having a losing season with all the drama that he's dealt with. There were always the joke memes out there after the AB drama finished that Mike Tomlin was dealing with Antonio Brown for 9 years and Le'Veon Bell most of that time. He should get a freaking Nobel Peace Prize for how much success actually was had during that time. Yes, there were some times where he underachieved with tons of talent. To have 3 Hall of Famers or at least 2 Hall of Famers, and maybe Bell was on that pace. He's not going to get there now with how his career's turned out. But all that talent, they didn't have a deep run. I mean, I was sitting there in the press box in 2017 at the end of that season when we're watching Blake Bortles march up and down the field on the Steelers, and Jacksonville go on the road to Pittsburgh in cold weather, which is crazy, and win a playoff game. That was one of the more shocking sports events I've really ever covered, and one of the biggest upsets really in NFL playoff history. That is a ding on Tomlin's resume. There are upsets like that. It does look bad, but overall the wins are there. The postseason success is there. He appeared in 2 Super Bowls, was able to win one. He's gonna be in the Hall of Fame someday. And honestly, too, the Rooney family does not fire coaches. Mm-mm. In fact, it's a fact. They've never fired a head coach. Chuck Noll eventually walked away. They let him, yes, he won 4 Super Bowls, but they let him flounder around for a decade and a half. People forget the 80s. They made only a couple appearances. Early 90s, they weren't good. They let him keep on moving. That would probably be criticized in today's era. He eventually walked away. Cowher took over. He had all those playoff failures despite tons of success mixed in. They let him keep lingering around until he won that Super Bowl. He then chose to walk away. They hired Tomlin, who at the time, that was kind of a historic hire in terms of being a black head coach with how young he was. And I also think it's going to help, fair or not. Tomlin has the resume on his own, but he's going to get in just for his historical achievement by being such a successful African-American head coach and what he's done for the NFL in that regard as a Tony Dungy disciple. So he's going to get in, and they're not going to fire him. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if he doesn't coach forever. I do think he's a little sick of hearing that he should get fired every time they lose a game. I think Ben's a little sick of it, too. Ben actually said in his Zoom after the Sunday Night Football loss to the Bills, when somebody asked him about his level of play and if he can still do it, and he just looked us stone cold and says, well, I guess I just suck, guys. And clearly, and we had a 30 seconds of just delay, and it clearly was he's just annoyed by the question, too, as he's getting older now and is declining. But I wouldn't be shocked if Tomlin finishes his career coaching somewhere else before he retires. I wouldn't be shocked if after their contracts are over for Ben and Tomlin, they both just choose to go do something else, and they're sick of hearing from the Pittsburgh sports fan, depending on how this shakes out. But either way, they're both Hall of Famers for sure. And Steelers fans are going to figure out someday, and they kind of got a glimpse last year without Ben, on how it will be at some point. They don't have anyone on the roster that I'm confident in replacing Ben. They're not going to be bad enough where they really can draft anybody. And any coaches that are ever discussed, like Mike McCarthy, etc., their resumes are just not better than Tomlin. So Mike Tomlin's not Bill Belichick. He didn't have that career at all, not close to it. And Belichick's the reason why he doesn't have more postseason success. He beat him a lot in big games, but he's had tons of success himself. He is a Hall of Famer, and is very comparable to Cowher's resume, which I don't think fans really recall enough, because you always see, well, Cowher wouldn't put up with this, or Cowher would have done this. I don't think Cowher could have handled Twitter. He would have had a heart attack. He would have been so mad. If you ever see the vein popping out in his head, I don't think he could have handled it. And the resume is just the same at the end of the day. So I think Tomlin gets a bad rep. I will say, though, going to the Bills game, it was a bad day at the office for Mike Tomlin. It was a bad day at the office for Ben. It was a bad day at the office for Randy Fichtner. So it's not to say these guys are void of criticism or shouldn't be criticized, or any criticism is not valid. They haven't had the greatest of weeks in a row now, several weeks in a row. But you have to also remember that prior to maybe the Ravens game where they played so poorly despite winning and then lost these 2 in a row, there were people saying that Mike Tomlin should win Coach of the Year, which is the only thing he's never done in his career. So you got to look at it in totality. And they are having a solid season based on everything that's gone on this year. So I would still say he's a candidate for me, even though I wouldn't give him the award. But I think he definitely takes a lot of hate that's unfounded by some spoiled Pittsburgh sports fan out there. And he's a Hall of Famer. He's going to get in. Whether you like it or not, there's just no way they can put Dungy in. They have Cowher in. They put Jimmy Johnson in, who, yes, he has 2 rings, but he didn't coach nearly as long, and he got in this past year. So there's no way they can do that and keep Tomlin out. Tomlin's definitely going to get in, but John Harbaugh is going to get in too. There's going to be a lot from this era that are going to get in. And I think having so many Hall of Famers as head coaches and quarterbacks from this same era causes some people to underappreciate some of those individuals who aren't maybe the greatest of the era.
Yeah, I feel like every time I watch a game, it's at least 10 times, oh, he's a Hall of Famer and he's a Hall of Famer. And it's like, who isn't a Hall of Famer?
Well, I mean, maybe you're watering the Hall of Fame down. That could also be a conversation. True. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the Oprah Winfrey meme where it's like, you get a Hall of Fame, you get a Hall of Fame, all that stuff. I'm glad you segued. You are the master of segueing to, the Bills game again. So the big question, was there any positives to take away from this game that you bring to Cincinnati?
Well, positives from the game. Well, again, James Washington the last couple of weeks has been able to get involved in the offense, and he's played well. Ben said it, and it is a little true. Deontay Johnson, after being benched, did play better in the second half. They only scored 3 points, though, so the offense didn't at all by itself. I would say one takeaway is nice is I feel like the defense is still playing well. The defense, who was one of the best defenses in the league just a few weeks ago, and that conversation's kind of died out a little bit because the team's not winning, but the defense is still playing well. Yes, they're allowing a little bit more points than they were earlier in the season. The schedule is getting tougher. Buffalo's probably the best team they placed all year with how great Josh Allen is. He's kind of like a young Ben Roethlisberger. Stephon Diggs there as a receiver. He had 10 catches for 100 plus in the game. I mean, that was a Bills offense that was moving, but they still didn't get 30 points in the game. So the Steelers defense did play well, especially for how injured they are with Joe Hayden out and Spillane, as I mentioned, and just a myriad of guys not able to be 100% for that Steelers defense. And Bud Dupree being out is just the biggest deal ever because that makes it easy to key on TJ Watt and kind of take him away from one side of the field. You don't have somebody else on the other side to help you. And Bud Dupree's really emerged, probably played his last game as a Steeler with the contract situation. But that's a big ding for this team to lose him for the year. I think the defense has played well, though, under the circumstances, also with the teams they've faced in those situations. Because also when your offense is floundering and not scoring and not staying on the field, it makes it tougher on the defense to have no breather and get right back out there with Cam Hayward being older, and a lot of those players, some key contributors, are older players based on who is currently still healthy. And what was forgotten because they didn't win, even though we covered it and people covered it and it did happen, they did end up joining NFL history. The Steelers in that game against the Buffalo Bills went 70 games in a row, and I'd imagine it's going to go to 71, 72, 73 with the way the Steelers pass rush is, in terms of they completed 70 games in a row with registering at least one sack. That is the new NFL record for a defensive unit. That dates back 4 years for the Steelers, so that includes some players that aren't still on this roster, so some dap to them. And they beat the record held by Tony Dungy again, the late 90s, early 2000s Tampa Bay Buccaneers that was capped off by winning a title with John Gruden as a head coach. So now that Buccaneer team, though, was able to, and like many great defenses, was able to have deep playoff runs, multiple NFC title appearances, winning a championship. The Steelers defense had a lot of drama and missed playoffs, so we'll see what they do this year. But that is a big deal because, yes, I do agree it's easier to get sacks now because there's so many more pass attempts, but still no one else is doing it. And it's one sack per game, that many in a row. So that is an achievement that this defense absolutely cares about. That was cool to see them do it on a national stage. And I imagine they're going to keep doing it. And this defense is still creating a pass rush, is still able to generate sacks, and is still generating turnovers. So to win in today's NFL, you're not going to be an 85 Bears defense really anymore. That's never going to happen again, I don't think, in today's NFL. But if you can generate sacks, you can generate a pass rush, or at least get in the quarterback's kitchen and generate turnovers every now and then, even half the clip the Steelers have been doing it, you're going to have chances, especially if the offense can turn it on again. And you just have to think that Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, James Washington, Eric Ebron, who we can't forget about because he has become Butterfingers too as that security blanket for Ben Roethlisberger, and Vince McDonald. That is a borderline Pro Bowl roster right now, and they can't catch the football, just fundamentals. So I'd imagine eventually they're going to make a diamond and catch the football regardless of what the play is being called. And I do have more confidence in that happening than, say, the running game getting moving. But the defense played well. James Washington emerged. And I can't imagine these receivers are going to keep just dropping balls permanently. It's that just they learned how to do that in Pee Wee football a decade ago, even for the youngest guy. So I'd imagine that's eventually going to turn it on, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that the defense might have to crack a whip on them too, because those guys sure look tired
Right.
from having to go out there constantly and be the anchor, the saving grace for the Steelers. It's something that we talk about in our group chat. The Steelers writers
year.
and I. It's exactly. Like I think Cody said it. This is the same thing as last year. You rely on your defense, and that's great. Defense wins championships, but defense isn't scoring all your points. So you definitely need points, and you need to catch the football to get said points.
It's really not. Yeah, it's just like they're dropping clear passes, and Ben has not played well recently at all. He's certainly declined. He flat out cannot throw the deep ball. It's one thing that I believe in, and I think you might too in this world, that if somebody keeps saying something or they keep showing you an example of something, eventually we should just believe them, that that's just who they are. Ben Roethlisberger told us all offseason, I can't throw the deep ball. I'm concerned about throwing the deep ball. And everyone just kept saying, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it, Ben.
Shake it off.
I think maybe he was right. Maybe he was telling us something, because he claims his arm is fine. He said that to us, that his arm is fine. Everything's good. Everything's wonderful, but it's not. And his arm is not clearly what it was in the past. It's clearly a dink and dunk offense where they're going to throw short curl routes, basically moving up and down the field. It's what the Patriots did to become a dynasty and get Brady 6 rings. It's not like you can't win that way, but it gives the defense only 10 yards to defend instead of 100. And he just doesn't have he missed the deep ball to James Washington in the Bills game. Just flat out can't throw the deep ball. So that's going to be a problem, especially when you have no play action pass off the running game being so poor. That's maybe the biggest concern, but we saw it last year too. You're not going to throw in Duck. You're not going to throw in Josh Dobbs even. You're not going to throw in Mason Rudolph. He's more worried about who he's dating on The Bachelor. You're just not going to throw in any of those guys. It's sink or swim with Ben. If he gets hurt, if he can't get it done, if he can't throw the deep ball, then you're just going to lose early in the playoffs this year. That's just how it is. It's Ben or bust this season. We can talk about the future and Wentz and different options if Ben chooses to retire or keep sucking, because he said he would in that scenario. Who knows? That he kind of just wants that attention to feel bad for him. But that's all for later. It's Ben or bust right now. And that's a major concern is Ben. But I do think that he could kind of still snap out of it if the receivers can play better and help him more as an older quarterback. Older quarterback can have success if they get help around them. And Ben had 20 incompletions against Washington. 8 of them were drops. So that's not helping him out. So if he can get some assistance for just the clear passes that are just purely being dropped in some of those first down plays, that would help, even if he is still missing deep balls.
Yeah, for sure. And they're going to need to get points, and they're going to need a win against Cincinnati, or I think then everything just kind of self-implodes in terms of, confidence and all of that stuff. Almost approximately a month ago, God, I can't believe it's been that long. The Steelers played the Bengals. 36-10 was the final score. They play them this coming Sunday. They looked good in that game. This is a Joe Burrow-less Bengals. And just a PSA, if I am a dedicated, I'm here for the Steelers. I'm following them. I'm watching them. I'm covering them. But I was genuinely upset with Dak Prescott and Joe Burrow getting injured. I have no emotional ties to these human beings, but just the first thing with Dak Prescott, all of the stuff he did this offseason with sharing about his mental health and all of that stuff, it just makes you want to root for the guy. And then with Joe Burrow, I don't know, he just seems like a nice guy, even though he plays for the Bengals.
Well, Dak also, the way Dak got hurt, it was just so gruesome. And that's why he got so much love, I think, from opposing players. It kind of, for basketball fans, it was kind of like Paul George's injury when he was with Team USA almost a decade ago, as crazy as that sounds, as that's that long ago. And he's been able to recover and have a solid career since, but that's how bad it looked, really. Or Gordon Hayward more recently, a couple years ago, where you just snaps and it's just gruesome. So that just looks so bad. And it's not good to see stars of a league, because also the Steelers' schedule, not only was it front loaded and kind of easy at the beginning of the year, that they were fortunate that it seemed like the week before every team they would play, the opposing team would either have drama or tons of injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And right before they play the Cowboys, Dak goes down. That's a totally different game without Dak there. They do play the Bengals with Joe Burrow, but that's a rookie quarterback against a strong pass rush, so he wasn't going to be able to do anything. And it also sucks with Joe going down. I mean, he was on pace to probably be NFL Rookie of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year for sure. And I don't know how nice he is. I've not been around him in person. I certainly believe Dak is. He's just a cool guy. I mean, he's smoking a cigar in almost every picture you see him outside when he's on the field. So he has the swag that you'd want. It could maybe lead you to believe that I could see personally maybe him being an annoyance, I guess, maybe for some of his friends that he probably is too arrogant. But that's how you have success in that industry. And it was just perfect that he would step right from college with so many doubters that you can do it in college, but not the pros, the Heisman winner, the national champion. And then in with the pros, even though the team's bad, he's still playing really, really well. So that was unfortunate that he couldn't complete the circuit. But I don't think there's any way the Steelers don't beat the Bengals without Joe Burrow now. This seems like a perfect matchup for Pittsburgh to get out of their funk. They own the Bengals. They're not a good team. They don't have the rookie sensation quarterback. They haven't really established weapons except for Tyler Boyd, who's just one guy. I mean, they lose that game. They could win the other ones, but that would really be an emotional, demoralizing situation. I do think that would be a problem. And it also almost appeared that you have to read between the tea leaves. You know this by being a journalist. When Ben is going out of his way to say how great everyone is, how everything's fine, how he's talking to Deontay, he trusts them. You can't blame the offensive line. Physicality issues are for everybody. Ben probably is reading the room as the team leader that these guys are feeling down on themselves. And that Mike Tomlin just a day earlier just blasted the team and said that the Buffalo Bills are a more physical team. And that a lot of these teams recently have been more physical than his Steelers, which is a major insult to any football player, certainly a player on the Steelers. So Ben kind of being that good cop there and defending them, that seemed to be calculated to say, Deontay, I still trust you. I'm still going to go to you. Offensive line, please still protect for me. I'm friends with you still. We're cool. Like that seemed like a lot of that was what it was in his
a bunch of kumbaya.
Yeah, I got the clip. It was a 20-minute long Zoom session I'm trying to cut down, and it's just Ben just singing kumbaya and waxing poetic the whole way through, really. So in a way, it was easy to cut because it was just like the same thing every other minute. So I can't imagine they're losing the Bengals. But yeah, that also was a benefit for the Steelers. They faced a lot of teams that didn't have their full staff, or certainly how they look now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Bengals game is going to be interesting because just like the Washington game, it's one of those games everyone's talking about. They're going to win. They're going to win. They're going to win.
Yeah.
Well, when you get on the field, it could be something different. But
sure.
Knock on wood, I hope I didn't just jinx it. So I'm not going to ask you what do they need to do against the Bengals because I think we pretty much covered that. Yeah. They need to catch the ball. The defense, just keep doing your thing, but please don't get hurt. Right. Chris Boswell kick some field goals and Jordan Perry punt the football.
Right.
Well,
it'd be nice if they get some return yards too.
Punt the football. Yeah. We don't want Jordan Berry punting the football too much now.
He's been okay when he's had to punt though. That's been a rare bright spot. Actually, he's still been a boomstick that almost makes it seem like they shouldn't have dropped him in the
comeback,
first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little Jordan Berry comeback story there. And Ray McLeod, who Chris Collinsworth likes to call McDonald, for me to defend him until say that he should get that McLeod name back, he might need to get some more return yards because he's been playing more like McDonald recently than McLeod. So that's also another negative. They haven't had the field position that they had at the beginning of the year too. It's been a perfect storm of crap for the Steelers the last couple of weeks, really.
Yeah, I mean, you take a great name like Ray McLeod and you ruin it with Ray McDonald, whatever.
Unless it gets him a McDonald's commercial. Or
there's your sponsorship.
Yeah.
So you kind of hinted at this new playoff format. So I'm going to read what I found on the internet. It says the first season with a 14-team playoff format, adding a third wildcard team for each conference and only awarding each conference top seed for a bye in the first round. So, I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room here. And right now it seems like it's not really a two-horse race between the Chiefs and the Steelers, but it kind of is in a way.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this playoff format and just kind of what it means. I don't know. You're the expert here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the first year of this playoff format. As I said, if they would have had this playoff format last year, the Steelers actually oddly would have been a postseason team. I don't like this playoff format. I think it's not a playoff format that doesn't reward the regular season enough. I mean, I guess it does provide that more of an interesting, almost a playoff within a regular season for that number one seed. I think what part of the mentality was the NFL doesn't love, certainly because number one, they want to have as many games as possible. So part of this was an original conversation in trying to increase the schedule to, at one point, they wanted to play 18 games. The NFL player didn't want to do that. That got whittled down to, okay, we're maybe okay with playing another game in the future. Then the owners came back, and now we're going to have this increased playoff format to at least have another playoff team in there, which does allow more revenue for the team, which maybe they now would need during COVID, even though the NFL, unlike, say, the MLS or the NHL, part of why the NHL isn't coming back yet, that if you have certain of those franchises in those leagues with no attendance, they're going to sink in a year or so. The NFL is not going to be in that situation. But part of that all is kind of a compromise and a war between the two. And also, I do think a part of it is the players eventually agreeing so that in the future they can try to get marijuana legalized. They're fighting for that, and they're losing player safety. Because this also does feel like hypocritical to player safety, that if you're an owner who talks about player safety, then how can you really argue to play more games in a violent sport when you're already making tons of money in the amount of games there are? But as we stand now, because a lot of that's still future conversation, they actually today were discussing trying to add another game to the schedule. So even after everything that's gone on this year with barely getting this season in and this schedule in with a global pandemic, they're already trying to get more games on this schedule. So that's a whole conversation for another day. But in terms of the playoff format, it makes it where you have to be the number one seed. I mean, you basically do. If you drop to 2, certainly 3 or below, you're really in a dire straits in terms of the postseason. Yes, it's better to be in than not, but to not only you lose the bye. So previously it was the 1 and the 2 would at least have that first week off. The other one would jump into the wild card matchup and at least be at home. Now the number 2 seed would have to go ahead and play, and nothing is guaranteed. Even if you're playing the lowest seed, nothing is guaranteed. We've seen upsets like I talked about earlier with the Steelers versus Jags and that playoff loss here in Pittsburgh. Anything can happen. Anything can happen. There's been a Music City Miracle in the NFL before. So nothing is guaranteed to win a playoff game. And to lose that bye, especially for the Steelers, who haven't had really a bye, they lost their bye against Tennessee. They've had the weird week of time off, but not really for that Ravens week and nothing else. They need the bye to get healthier. All the injuries we talked about, just to maybe get the groove back, certainly depending on how this season finishes out. They're probably not going to have it. The Chiefs, they have lost. They did lose a conference game. So that's another thing. When the Steelers lost to Washington with the remaining schedule, that was the best game to lose because that was an out-of-conference game. It wouldn't have affected tiebreakers, and it wouldn't have really hurt you in terms of your playoff positioning. You would have still had the number 1 overall seed spot ahead of the Chiefs had the Steelers beat the Bills. But now the Steelers lose to the Bills. They have 2 losses. The Chiefs have 1. They now also have lost the conference game like Kansas City loses the conference game. So now the Chiefs have the driver's seat for the number 1 overall seed unless they get tripped up. And they've not played great recently by any means at all. A lot of teams have floundered recently. It's not just the Steelers. But still, they have the driver's seat now. The Steelers really, really need that bye, though. It's doubtful they're going to get it now. And they could even fall to the 3 if somehow they don't win this division. I do think they're still going to – I think they're probably going to finish as the number 2 seed and lose the bye. But you would lose a bye if the only number one seed gets the bye. You lose the bye if you're the number 2. And I think it makes it a situation where it's not rewarding regular season success enough for me. And I also like even numbers. I'm like a guy who I don't like having one team get a bye and one team getting this. Like – it's 2 teams do this, 2 teams do that. It seems more succinct. So it's odd to have one team getting a bye and the 2 seed playing. And then with COVID, I mean, you don't know. They certainly can't do a week 18 or anything like that now. They don't want to do that. And if you do that, then the Steelers absolutely will have no buys if they have to throw any games into there. So Maybe they should have done it before the season, but they're not going to do it now. But the Steelers would lose a bye if they drop below the 1. Only the 1 gets the bye. And then it's going to make it a longer road in the postseason. It does add another team in. So there are more teams than ever before. But it also, Rachel, for me, I could see in a year of COVID, the NHL expanding their playoffs. Okay. I don't want that long-term, honestly. I think that pretty much really devalues the regular season altogether. I mean, you're having half your teams get in already on a regular basis. If you do a tournament like they did this past year, what is the point of the regular season, really? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're almost know you're going to be in some capacity a month and a half in, and if you don't get in, you're really god-awful. The NBA allows half the teams in as well, and they did their kind of weird bubble thing too, allowing more teams. It's fine during COVID. I don't want all that permanently because I even play in tournaments in the middle of regular seasons. It kind of devalues everything for me from the regular season perspective. But the NFL is the one league that it wasn't like they were only allowing a few teams in. It wasn't like when Major League Baseball had to add a wild card because they only had a few teams getting in, and you had to win a playoff series to go to the World Series, and there were no playoff series prior to that. That's why, for example, the Pirates franchise hasn't won a playoff series since the last World Series in '79 because the Bonds years, they would get right into the NLCS and lose, and there was nothing before. So there was no playoff series win. So they had to add more rounds. They had to add a wild card. I don't mind the wild card game. That's fine. But I wouldn't even want their whole random NCAA tournament type of thing to be permanent. But they didn't have enough, so I get it, and I get it with the pandemic. The NFL was fine. It was just fine. 6 teams in both. You had the 2 getting a bye. The division champs were able to. You had more than one wild card now. So anyone who was had in a tough division who was still really, really good and just lost out could say the Patriots are there or whoever else. You're still going to have a chance. It was fine. It felt like it was not broke. You don't need to fix it. It was tinkering with something just to do it. I'm sure money's involved is the reason, but the NFL just it's floating in money. I mean, we've learned the last few years, every time somebody says, well, because of the national anthem, because of domestic violence, because of whatever else, people are going to stop watching the league. They're just not. I mean, the NFL is not in trouble no matter what happens. And they didn't need to mess with it. So I don't like it, but it is a big deal to get the number 1 seed. And right now the Steelers do not look like they're going to be the number 1 seed, which means they're going to lose a bye in a season they desperately need it.
And for context, the Chiefs have the Saints on Sunday. They have the Falcons on the 27th. And then to kick off the new year, they have the Chargers on January 3rd. You don't want playing tournaments during regular seasons, then you would hate the Lamar Hunt Open Cup in MLS and in the USL.
I know there's some crazy things going on there. Yeah. Yes, I would not probably like that. No.
Yeah, I know. And like the NWSL, they had the Challenge Cup. Of course, they were the first league to come back. And now they're like having it where the Challenge Cup is going to happen every year within the season. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, God, guys, why? But anyway, small rant done. So, I mean, we're pretty much wrapping it up. So to kind of put a bow on everything, Mike, the Steelers, they're injured. They're not catching the football right now. Aside from the defense, what do you think, A, is positive? And B, like, what do you say, in your words, is the thing that needs to improve, like, right now? Or the Steelers are, A, going to lose in the first round of the playoffs, or B, lose the division?
I mean, again, it's tough because there's so much. I don't even know if it is one thing. I will say in terms of what's a positive, and this is what Ben said again, and this is what a team leader is going to say, that while the Steelers have not been playing well recently, while they got lucky earlier in the season, although in past years, they probably would have lost that game to the Broncos third string. They probably would have lost to the Eagles off a game from Wentz, even though he's not had a good year. They probably would have lost to Dallas with how bad they played and how banged up they were. The Steelers just lay eggs in random games in past years, which is the ding on Tomlin that sometimes exists. So that didn't really happen this year, the first 10 or so weeks of the season. But it's finally coming to fruition now where those close game, lucky wins that are bad wins are turning now into losses. So while they have not played well, they are still in a position to definitely be in the playoffs for sure. They're definitely getting in. They're certainly still in the driver's seat for the division title. They're still having a chance because the schedule that you just read to me, the Steelers have the Bengals, they have the Colts, and then they have the Browns. The Colts are a good team. They're 9-4 as we're speaking. And Phillip Rivers, to me, actually is very, very underrated historically. I think that if you're looking at Dan Fouts in the Hall of Fame, he's basically the same. He's going to probably be a Hall of Famer too, despite not winning a title. But he's older, and that's a Steelers defense that's very familiar with him. They have a pass rush that could destroy him. The Browns have been very inconsistent. You look at common opponents. The Browns, they won a few games in a row. Congrats. They're 9-4. It's the best record they had in 13 years. They just lost to the Ravens, who are a team the Steelers were able to beat twice this year despite not playing well. And the Steelers dominated the Jaguars. The Cleveland Browns beat the Jaguars by 2. The Cleveland Browns have not – I mean, I actually think that people are so excited the Browns are relevant for the first time in a decade and a half that they're overrating the Browns. I mean, if you look at the schedule, and this is a team that's played better without OBJ, but they're not that great. They certainly could lose, and they probably wouldn't even be favored in that game. So the Chiefs schedule with the Saints, and it looks like maybe either equally or maybe even a harder schedule, depending on if Drew Brees gets back there for the Saints. So maybe they could drop one. But even if they don't, the Steelers are at least secure that for the first time in 3 years, they're going to be in the postseason. They are a team that if they start catching the football, I think that's the number one. The fundamentals that while they need to run the football, ideally to win, to at least threaten, because the defense has been good enough. So the offense needs to be better. That's the one thing. The offense needs to be better in today's NFL. And while you need a threat of running to help the offense and help the quarterback and help everything, receivers just cannot be dropping clear catches. These are fundamentals with how talented they are. I do think they're going to turn that around. I don't have confidence the running game is ever going to turn it around, so that might be why they would lose. But the receivers can't let them lose that way with dropping clear catches with how talented they are. If you're going to lose, I'd rather Ben suck. I'd rather the running game flounder than to have part of it be those receivers dropping passes. So I think that's a key thing that will get corrected. The offense clearly needs to be better. But you look around the NFL, the Chiefs, they've been winning, but they didn't play well against Miami, who was the team that lost and able to send the Steelers to the playoffs. They didn't play well against Denver the week before, despite winning. Seattle's been losing a lot recently over in the NFC. These teams that originally at the beginning of the year were the elite teams, they're coming back down to earth. I don't know if it's COVID or what it is or the reduced training camp, but there really aren't that many, if any, elite teams in the NFL this year. No one's really playing dominating football. Everyone's had weaknesses. The Chiefs have not been as good this year as they were last year. So to give it a glass half full, the Steelers haven't played well recently and they're finally losing, but a lot of teams around them also aren't playing well. And the teams that are playing well are still vulnerable, maybe overrated, and they certainly can still beat, like, say, Cleveland. So it's not like it'd be unheard of if they still can knock these teams off and have a deep playoff run. But we were talking weeks ago, and I was saying this on my show, that when you start a season 8, 9, 10-0, I don't care if you're the worst 8, 9, 10-0 team in history, you're still undefeated, which is a positive. Mm-hmm. So when you start out with that hot of a streak, it becomes AFC title game or bust. It becomes Super Bowl appearance at least or bust. I mean, Alan and I were talking about hotel rooms in Tampa would probably jinx things. We were discussing, because of COVID, if you get credentialed for the game, maybe you're credentialed for media day, and we'll do this and this, because they normally haven't let both of us go to the same game because of the pandemic. So maybe we jinxed it. All of that could still happen, but it went from Super Bowl or bust in a way to now there is no guarantee they're going to win a playoff game. There's a guarantee they're going to be in one. There's no guarantee they're going to win a playoff game. And if they go through a year where they're at one point 11-0 and they don't even win a playoff game, I don't care if you lose the bye. I don't care that you lost byes earlier in the year. I don't care about COVID, the pandemic. With all this talent on this team and the way they lost these games, it would then be unacceptable and tons of criticism would be valid. So that is where they are right now. But the sky is not falling. It certainly could be worse for a lot of teams in the NFL out there, and there are a lot of teams playing just as bad. But it has to be annoying for these players and even fans that everything you brought up that the national media were saying, and I honestly do believe, like, Colin Cowherd's the best. He's the best heel in the world. He is a wrestling heel, and he does it well, and it's been successful for him. He's smoking a cigar every Steelers loss, getting engagement. And it's helping him. It's working. So you're feeding into it. He knows what he's doing. He's great at being a heel. I'm envious in a way. But all you had to do to shut this up and make him not successful at that gimmick is win and play better. So they're being proven right with their ridiculous hot takes when the Steelers were undefeated by just now losing while they're still playing poorly. So you want them shut up, just play better. And it is there to play a little bit better. But I don't know how they're going to run the football any better. I don't think Connor's a featured back, and I don't think the combination of any of these guys with the poorest offensive line is getting it done. So that's the biggest concern. But they have to get better as a receiver core. They have to get better as an offense, and it's not the end of the world based on the landscape of the NFL.
So to close out, score prediction for the Cincinnati game.
They have not scored 30 points in a while. I mean, we're talking October with how much talent is on this offense. And yes, they did it last time they played the Bengals. It's hard to go there with how bad they've been on offense, but I'm going to have to at least say they definitely win the game. I feel like they're going to win this game by multiple touchdowns, which maybe will be the Vegas line. We'll see. I'm going to say the Steelers beat the Bengals. I'll go 30-13. I'll say they barely get back to 30. They do it on offense again. I really do think they're going to click back on offense against the Bengals, and that doesn't mean the Steelers are really back and they're a dominating team. And everything I've said to this point being negative isn't valid. It's just the Bengals are that the team that the doctors order kind of to get your groove back against. Mm-hmm. I think it'll be a tougher game against the Colts.
Yeah,
I think that'll be a tough game against the Colts. The Browns won't be an easy game either, but they should be able to certainly beat the Bengals and beat them handily. The Bengals have less of an offense than they had with Joe Burrow, who only scored a touchdown or so. So I'm going to say 30-13 just on a pure guess there. I do think they get the win. But if they don't, then they're in trouble for not even being the number 2 seed. Because one thing that I think also occurred against the Bills, and maybe this is why we got the result we did, the conversation that you discussed was all about Steelers-Chiefs, a future AFC title game between the Steelers and Chiefs. Who's going to be the number 2 seed? The Buffalo Bills were only a game back the whole time.
Right.
And I think the Buffalo Bills might have been a little annoyed, and clearly the Buffalo Bills have entered the chat. So if the Steelers would drop another game, the Buffalo Bills certainly could be the number 2 seed. And if the Steelers end up as a 3 with how tired they are, then I would think they're probably going to not win a playoff game.
Bold predictions. I like it. That's what we brought you on here for.
You're welcome. I try to just be myself when that ends up happening.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. This was
problem.
a lot of fun. Mike Asti, everyone. Mike, where can people find you on Twitter? And do you have any final thoughts before we bid adieu?
Well, I think I gave all my Steeler final, thoughts in there and takes. Just a final thought would be, as I said this to you off air, I enjoy the background there. I enjoy the scarves. That's a cool thing. I know it's going to be difficult to take down when you have to move. And I told you that I'm jealous of Alan's background too. And whenever he's appearing on Zoom because of all the press passes, I could have so many over the years, but I haven't been collecting them. So I would have like 3 that I kept in the decade that I've been around. So yeah, I mean, definitely thanks for having me on for sure. Definitely do this again for you if you want here at some point. Yes, of course. And yeah, I mean, it's if nothing else has been less, it's this is weird to say, but maybe this is my closing thoughts. As much as the Steelers have dealt with everything you could imagine this year, as someone who's covered this team now a while, it is weird to say that covering a team during a global pandemic generates less asinine news than in prior seasons, because that included Antonio Brown and the bell drum and all of that. So this has actually been a little easier in some respects, even though it's been odd and challenging in its own right. So that's at least a positive. It's a lot more about what's on the football field. But yeah, I mean, this was certainly fun. You can find me on Twitter at Mike Asti 11. So at Mike ASTI 11, the double ones there on Twitter. Feel free to subscribe to our channel there, Pittsburgh Sports Live. Find it on YouTube. It's actually free to subscribe thanks to our sponsors. So you hit the little subscribe button bottom of any of the videos over there on the channel. Just searching Pittsburgh Sports Live on YouTube, you'll find it. Definitely feel free to do that. Find us on any of the Now Network sites for sure. And you really probably could just Google search me and a lot's going to come up. I think that would work as well. Of my current and past work as well. I think you can Google search me and that would work. Mike J. Asti maybe would be better for some Google searching. So yeah, that's really it. I definitely appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. And then to give the final rundown, as I always do, my friends, you can follow the Pittsburgh Sports Castle Twitter at PGH Sports Castle. I'm on Twitter at Rachel Kruger. I have 2 A's in my name, not just one. You can thank my mom for that. We're on all major platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just find us by searching our name. We're on Google Podcasts, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, and of course Spreaker, where we record our shows. This is so scripted and I hate it, so I'm so sorry.
That's a lot of places. I have a podcast on a lot of those, but I have to say that there was a couple that I hadn't even heard of. I'm on like 6 different platforms, and you literally have the whole market corner.
Hey, they just started popping up on Spreaker, and I was like, click, 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 click.
Yeah.
Speaking of click, 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 please rate, review, and subscribe to our show. Your feedback's important to us. And like I said, we have I almost just let it slip who the guest was going to be from Pitt Women's Soccer. It's a goalkeeper. So get your guesses coming. It's going to be a fun show. So thanks again, Mike, for joining us.
No problem.
We'll see y'all next time.